Welcome to Six in the Six. Tonight's fabulous guest, myself, as grilled by Denai partner, Bree Star.
Hey, very happy and very excited to be here.
Oh
Uh,
man, I'm in the hot seat. This is something new, so looking forward to it.
I have 6 really good questions for you. I think you'll like them.
All right,
Are
well,
you
let's go.
okay? So the first one, I think you told me at one point that before you were a full-time coach for goalies of basically every sport, I think you said you were a computer scientist or something like that, right?
Well, scientist might be too big of a word. I was a self-taught programmer, computer programmer, back in the Stone Age of computer languages. And due to a lack of getting career goals and objectives down on paper at some point, got shuffled into the project management side of that world.
Okay. So my question based off of that is how does your former career inform what you're doing now? Like what can you take from your former career and use now?
Wow, that's a good one. I think I think my answer to this question has probably changed over my coaching career, but I think for where I am now with it, I think the attention to detail in like executing things or trying to get things executed has was an important skill set I learned from that. I think when you're putting together software, you gather requirements from the customers. You figure out what you're doing or what the person wants. In this case, what do the goalies need? What do they want? And trying to solicit input from them to build what we would call a requirement in the software business, and then basically figure out how to program that and execute it, test it, all that good stuff until you deliver it. So I guess I'm figuring out what the goalies need, helping them execute, running tests and seeing what needs improving, and hopefully spitting out a good final product.
So like a similar process to what you used to do just with athletes.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, and we could probably go into a nice philosophical discussion on the difference between computer software and human software. Um, Obviously, us humans we don't follow a set procedure necessarily. Well, maybe our habits are our set procedure, so maybe we do. But certainly, our imperfect selves program imperfect software, so maybe we have more free will over our imperfections as people.
Right? Do you think that's good or bad though?
I think it's good because I think my approach to coaching is more in the let's experiment, let's try, let's experiment, let's try, let's kind of find your own style, um, and kind of produce that final product based on what works best for you, as opposed to maybe following a more rigid set of, hey, this is 1 through 20, let's run it through. Oh, it didn't work. Fix step 18, run it through. Oh, that didn't work. Do step 16. I think there's too much variability in what we do as goalies to kind of follow that kind of programmatic mindset, if that makes sense.
Like being a goalie is not as linear as maybe you would hope it would be.
I think that's very true. And I read somewhere, or I forget, I didn't think of it, but I read somewhere that there's not a goalie will never see the same shot ever again. So I think a lot of times we can think, and you can attest to this from your playing days. Um, a stick side high is never just a stick side high. It's in that general area, but what we're looking at is different in front of us. Is the sun up? Is it behind a cloud? Are we under the lights? Is the shooter stringing yellow? Is it white? Is it black? What color's the shaft? Is the ball dirty? Is the ball new? there's so many variables. Did I mention wind? Wind or I don't think you'll ever see an identical shot ever. So trying to exist in a preconceived set of steps that I must do things this way, I think you're just setting yourself up for failure at some level.
That's interesting about the shots because putting it in that perspective, there's like an infinite number of different shots you can see. If you consider all the variability, like the sun being up, the sun being down, beginning of the game, end of the game, color of the ball, color of the stick. I think that's interesting that you bring that point up.
Well, then, I mean, then let's get into more details if you want to go, right? Is the shot coming from 90? Is the shot coming from 45? Let's talk about the precise stringing. Is the pocket deeper or shallower? How's the release point out of the pocket? Is the shaft have more whip or less whip? So, like you said, the infinite combination of possibilities makes a stick side high shot very difficult because they're never, who knows what exactly it's going to do.
Right, exactly. Would you then, all of that being said, and everything that you learned from your job and how it helps you coach goalies, would you ever go back and just start off right away being a coach, or are you grateful that you had the experience of doing something that was outside of coaching before you started full-time coaching?
Another interesting question, the old, would you go back and change anything? Oh, I think I ended up finding my true calling in coaching and having the impact on, the next generation, if you will. I think I found that as my calling, but I think I had to go through what I've been through to maybe not necessarily realize it, but appreciate it and really be grateful that I'm getting to finally do it, which just kind of fills me with more love for that. And I think my passion and energy because of that shows through. I don't think there'll ever be a day where I take for granted what I'm doing now because I've kind of done what I didn't want to do for so long.
Right. Like you would not have ended up where you are on this journey if you didn't do that.
Right. If I just started out, I might be like, oh man, I'm so burnt out on coaching. This is driving me crazy. But I've seen the other side of, I don't really want to do that. So it's like I said, every day I'm grateful to be doing what I'm doing.
Right. You've seen the 9 to 5 grind and then you've seen the coaching grind and you know the pros and cons of each.
Yeah. I went from the 9 to 5 grind to the 4 to midnight, 4 a.m.
Yeah.
to midnight grind. So but hey, it goes to when you love what you're doing, the hours don't really
Right.
seem to happen.
Do a job you love, never work a day in your life.
Exactly.
All right. Second question, because you coach a lot of different goalies in a lot of different sports. In your opinion, what is the hardest sport to be a goalie in, and why do you say that?
Oh, wow. You got a lot of good ones tonight. This is going to get me in trouble with some subset of my population, probably. Um, oh, I think I have to go with the lacrosse goalie. Um, certainly soccer, you have to defend a bigger net. Um, Hockey, the net's about the same size. Field hockey, the net's a little larger. But I think in lacrosse, there's a lot more variability in where the shots are coming, like how they're, like we just talked about, how they're coming at us. And I think throw in with the women's game that most of those shots are done somewhere in the 6 meter range, right in front of us.
Right.
I think that makes it a very difficult thing to deal with. Like the save percent from that tight end is extremely low. I think it's somewhere in the 20-ish
Mhm.
percent range, which is an absolutely ridiculous bad save percentage for any other sport. So if you look at strictly the statistics, I think that kind of backs it up. All those statistics are just historical tracking of things. So I'll go with lacrosse.
Do you So I think there's something to be said about the number of shots lacrosse goalies see versus the number of shots like a soccer goalie would see or a field hockey goalie would see. I think that the only other comparable would be ice hockey because I feel like they might see a similar number of shots during the game, but like an ice hockey goalie physically covers up a lot more of the goal than a lacrosse goalie does, which
Yeah,
I think is an advantage.
yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, if you start to talk about maybe box lacrosse goalies that are padded up
Right.
a little more, maybe
Yep.
I think that gets in a little closer. I feel that there's more variability in the unpredictability
Mhm.
of a lacrosse ball as opposed to a hockey puck.
Right.
I think hockey shares a similar problem for the goalie in like deflections off legs and sticks
Yeah.
and things like that, which we may not see in lacrosse because of shooting space and rules like that. Um, but we've got crazy bounces, and some of those shooters are starting to figure out how to put some spin on those shots so they bounce even
Mhm.
funnier. So yeah, I would kind of agree with that. I think the other thing hockey goalies might have it a little easier for is I think their mobility side to side is a
Mhm.
little better because of the ice.
Right.
Um, and let's not forget that ice hockey goalies are taught to save with all parts of their body.
Yeah, that's true. Yep.
Um, I feel like the lacrosse goalie position traditionally, luckily it's changing, but I feel traditionally the younger goalies when they're starting up are told, hey, top hand to the ball, top hand to the ball. Everything's top hand to the ball.
Mhm.
Well, what about our bottom hand?
Right.
What about if we just want to drop both hands and step in front of it?
Right.
We're not padded up to do that, so it's kind of a hindrance. But can you imagine telling a soccer goalie you can only use your right hand to make saves?
Right. Oh my god, yeah. How
You
would you ever,
know,
like, be
Yeah,
effective?
or I mean, what about the ice hockey goalie, right? Well, you're only allowed to use your catcher. You can't use your blocker to make saves. So it's almost like the way, again, traditionally that coaches worked with lacrosse goalies. We we almost did ourselves a disservice by top hand to the ball. Let's at least say both hands to the ball.
Right. Yeah.
And now
Like,
how much do you trust your gloves? Because if you're going off stick hip, it's difficult to get my top hand over there, my stick head over to that shot. But
mhm.
guess what's there? My bottom hand. Why don't you just punch it?
Yeah,
Um,
it you do question why we aren't capitalizing on our opposite hand as much as other goalies do in other sports.
well, and some of it goes to protection and equipment, right? So, I mean, when you played, how much did you trust your gloves? Did you think you could punch a shot coming at you from Kayla Trainer, for example? Or were you
No.
kind of like, man, I don't know, either I should step out of the way or try to get my stick there?
Right.
If you had a little more trust in your equipment, if they were more padded up, I think we would be more likely to feel safe doing that. So
Right.
there certainly is that element. And I think the equipment's getting better. And I am not
Mhm.
advocating to come out like box goalies in the field game.
Right.
But it's one of those considerations we have to think about.
Right. Like, what else can you wear that might make goalies utilize more of their body other than just their top hand, pretty much?
Right. I mean, as you know, coaching goalies too, it's the flinch mechanism that I'm human and I don't like things shot at my head or my
Mhm.
chest area. That's bad enough. Now imagine sticking your hand out there or your knee or whatever, saying, well, I'm just going to get in the way of it like an ice hockey goalie, knowing
Right.
that's going to hurt like a mother when you take it off the.
Right. Exactly. It'll be interesting too because there is such like the ego aspect of, oh, I don't want to wear shin guards because that's not cool, or oh, I don't want to wear padded pants because that's not cool. So like, especially now that women's lacrosse, like high school goalies aren't required to wear shin guards anymore like they used to be. So it would be interesting to see if stuff goes the opposite direction. Okay, now you have to wear this because now goalies are saving the ball more like this and we want them to be protected.
Well, I think that's another interesting point, kind of that the culture around it where less is cooler and kind of show off your bruises, which
Mhm.
is which is fine. Even the goalies I work with, I constantly advocate, getting into the ball more. You have two choices with a bruise. You can either tell people you earned it, or you can tell
Right.
people you stood there and took it. So,
Right.
but again, to your point, it's kind of that you're not cool if you pad up,
Hmm.
which then kind of leads to, well, what if you really weren't that cool during practice and padded up? So when you started getting pelted, at least your flinch mechanisms didn't start to activate and you're not getting valuable reps.
Right.
If you want to tough it out in a game, okay, because your game adrenaline might pull you through that. But if you're starting to shy away in practice, you're really doing yourself a disservice.
Right. Especially if it's not like, then you're going to get yourself into more bad habits, right? Like if you keep doing that during practice, because you'll bring that eventually into a game. If you're doing it in practice, you're going to be doing it in a game too.
Yeah, exactly. And imagine if you had you have a practice 2 days before a big game and you go out there and you're all bruised up on your legs. You're really not going to be at 100% likely.
Right. That too. Yeah, that's actually a really good point too. Next question. In your opinion, what's the hardest aspect of coaching goalies and what's the easiest aspect of coaching goalies?
Ooh, I think in my in my recent experience with coaching goalies, as kind of I've evolved as a coach, I think the more difficult part for me has been kind of cracking the nut open a little bit and having them really think for themselves.
Yeah, you've said
Um,
this before. Yep.
yeah, because you know, they look at us and we're the coach. And again, I think traditionally, I'm not saying coaching styles or whatever, but we're viewed as the educator that knows it all.
Mhm.
And I like to tell them as soon as I can that I'm not the keeper of all goalie knowledge.
Right.
Um, it's you're in the cage, you're seeing what you see, you're experiencing that, you're making decisions based on that. So kind of getting into them to think purposefully about what they're working on and like take charge of their own development
Mhm.
from a mindset standpoint almost. I mean, we're not even talking the physical or the X's and O's at this point. It's them going in to those situations and understanding that, the way I'm going to solve this puzzle looks different than the way she's solving this puzzle. And that's okay because I don't have to be the same because every single one of us, just like shots are different, every single one of us are different. Our legs are longer or shorter, our arms are longer or shorter, we're braver or we're not a brave, or who knows what's going on up here. So I think kind of building in some of that empowerment that they can kind of ask those guiding questions for what they need, I think's been the toughest thing for me recently.
Yeah, and I think just from me as a teacher perspective, it's it's very much just like that in the classroom too. So if these athletes are at school, like not critically thinking for themselves or not like taking the initiative with these things that we want them to as students, then they probably wouldn't be apt to do it as much as athletes either, which is really tough because like I feel like they miss out on so much valuable learning if they had these skills. Either they don't have them or they're not as strong as they could be, or maybe they don't even feel confident enough to show up with these skills because they've been taught, oh, you just receive information in your life, you don't give it yourself.
Well, yeah, and I like that you used critical thinking in what you just said, because to me, that critical thinking or that deep thinking, I think that's kind of a skill that's not necessarily nurtured anymore.
Yeah.
And,
Yep.
they look at the teachers or they look at the coaches that we're just going to spill knowledge into you and you soak up like a sponge as much as you can. But, are you going to be a librarian or a warrior? Are you going to store that stuff? How much do you store? Or are you actually going to go out and start to use it and say, hey, that didn't work? But then I think about deep thinking, critical thinking requires some attention and focus. And, these days everyone's on their phone constantly distracted. Hey, I don't know the answer to this. I'm going to Google it and see what someone else is going to tell me how to do it. I feel
Right.
like the ability
Yeah.
for us to sit down and think about what we want to do is we're like losing it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point too, where we're not that we're wired this way, but we're leaning towards humanity being wired this way, where if you have a question, you just go off and find somebody else who will answer the question. You don't necessarily solve the problem yourself innately as much as we used to, which is too bad. And I feel like it doesn't just hurt you in sports; it'll hurt you in a variety of places. But it's hurting all of us because most of us approach life that way.
Well, and I think it's even one level worse than that, maybe, because if you're just going out and looking for an answer, I feel like a lot of the time you're finding an answer that you're predisposed towards anyway. So
Mhm.
you're not really questioning what you're finding because it's based on your perspective anyway, even if you didn't know the precise answer.
Right.
Whereas if you were to think through it a little bit and gave yourself the time to do that, I think you'd spit out a different answer potentially. Kind of
Right.
if we tie it back into the net, right? How are you dealing with that shot? This is
Right.
like
Yes.
8 out of 10 goalies save it this way, but you're not 8 out of 10 goalies. You're 1 out of those 10. So how, you
Right.
know, but we're like, oh, well, they did it this way, so I must.
Right. Yeah. So like, well, that's like too. Like you see now, I see this more with field players than I do with goalies, but how I see all of these girls always line up on the 8 meter, trying trying to look like Charlotte North, and like not that it's bad to imitate what you see on social media or ESPN or whatever, but they are all doing the cradle that Charlotte North does in the 8 meter, and then they're all taking one step and ripping it if they take one step and rip it. And I'm like, okay, I love that we're learning from other people using the resources that we have, but I'm like, okay, now everybody's taking the same shot that Charlotte North is always taking. Why don't we see as much variation anymore? Why aren't you going out of your way to learn a different shot that could possibly be more effective than Charlotte North's shot, or could be also something that other girls will see you do and then take it and run with it the way we've all taken what Charlotte North does on the 8 meter and run with it as well.
Well, right. Find something that works so that it, but you need to innovate on it. We can all be
Yes.
copycats, but what's going to separate you from the other 3,000 like you now?
And I think that's one reason why players like Charlotte North have been so successful is that they aren't just lacrosse players, they're innovators. And whether it's an innate skill that they have or if it was something nurtured when she was growing up by parents, coaches, teachers, whatever, she clearly had the confidence to go out and do what she wanted to do and go out and take risks and try different stuff and ended up where she ended up. Kayla Trainer did the same thing, and it was cool. It was cool to see when I was at Syracuse. It was cool to see Kayla do it and try different things in practice because she was like, okay, this is something I want to try. If she failed, she failed. If she was successful, then she put it in her game ultimately. So, yeah, the game needs more innovators. That's a good point. I like that you use that word.
Yeah, well, now tie that back to your like one of your original questions about how, all the shots aren't the same. So now imagine someone like Charlotte North or Kayla is, innovating on us as goalies every single time they come down, right? So that's making those shots more difficult for
Right.
us, which makes us need to be more innovative to react to those things.
Right.
But now throw in stick manufacturers that are like, wow, look what Charlotte's doing. If we could give a little more whip to that stick she uses, okay, so now you've got innovation on the physical skill set of the player,
Yeah. Yep.
supported by a better piece of technology in your hand.
Yep.
And now you've got a little bit of a nightmare on your hand as a goalie.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a very fair point that there is innovation as a player on top of innovation of the physical resource that you're using. So it's just innovation on innovation on innovation on already a very fast and challenging position game to begin with. It's a really good point. The second part of that question was what was the easiest or what is the easiest aspect of coaching goalies?
Um, I think the easiest part is like working through the corrective process with them. So, I mean, once we've cracked the hard part of them feeling like they can ask the questions and push their boundaries and stuff like that, I feel like the easiest part's like asking, hey, you know, how did that feel for you and how did that work for you, right? And they know the answer most of the time. And sometimes they're like, well, I don't know. And usually that's because they're like worried about saying they don't know. So if you ask them something like, well, yeah, I know, but if you did, what would you say? And
Right.
usually an answer pops out that's like, yeah, I don't disagree with that. I also saw a little bit of this. What do you think? But most of the goalies I work with are very smart in that regard. Once you make that space for them to feel safe, like, oh, I'm not, maybe I'll say something stupid, but that's fine.
Right. It's cool when they utilize their autonomy, when they realize they have it and then use it. I think that's very cool.
Yeah, I mean, once that's hit, like you just said, that's the easy part. And then once you have those two, once my easy part, my hard part, or maybe it's my hard part and then my easy part combined, they're just growth and acceleration amplifies because now, like I said, you have that safe space where they're like, hey, I want to ask this question. I don't care if it's dumb, and I think I need to fix it this way.
Right. Like they're not as passive in their learning anymore. They are more active, which is obviously what you want as both like a coach, player, teacher, whatever.
And
Yeah, that's
then
good.
guess what? They
What?
have fun.
Yes, that too. Yeah. Because they have more of a say. They're not just listening to what the coach is saying. Like they're doing what they want to. So yeah, that's a good point. Next question: where do you see goalies in 10 years? Lacrosse goalies in 10 years. What do you think the position will look like?
Boy, that's a real interesting question. Unfortunately, my crystal ball broke this morning.
Yeah.
Um, I think so. I think one of the things they need to slow down on the women's side a little bit is these rule changes constantly.
Oh my
Um,
God. Yeah.
uh,
Yep.
and it's kind of twofolded. I mean, part of me feels like they're trying to make our game look like the boys' game. It's like,
Mhm.
just don't leave it alone. And then just let some rules soak in a little bit so they can kind of fall out and we can get used to them. I feel it's too fast and there's too much unpredictability that to answer your question, because of that, I don't know.
Mhm.
I almost the dark side of that coin to me says that everyone's playing box lacrosse in 10 years. That's the only game in town, so we could be in the Olympics and you can't tell if it's male or female playing.
Yeah,
I personally
that's
don't like that.
fair. Like sixes. Like you think sixes is gonna get so pervasive because everybody wants to be in the Olympics.
Yeah, and I love that our sport's getting some recognition at the Olympic level, but in some regards, it's not our sport. Um,
Right.
it's a variation of it, which I don't get me wrong, I love sixes, but I think I just think we need to sit back and maybe be a little more logical about it than trying to rush into let's get to the Olympics. Let's get it to the Olympics.
Right.
And then so on the other side of that, kind of the light side of that coin, because you've worked a few clinics with me, I love the switch hand drill I
Mhm.
work, where if you're a righty naturally, as that girl cuts across and you're cutting across to match her stick, um, can we switch hands? So all of a sudden she's looking at a lefty when she thought that space was available.
Right.
I think I see as more coaches open up more minds of more goalies and say, hey, we can do things that traditionally we weren't taught to do, and we
Mhm.
can we can be more dynamic and more. I think we'll see more stuff like that going on. And
Yeah.
I kind of joke based on that maybe our goalie sticks will end up looking like a canoe paddle at some point. Maybe there's two heads. I
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe we end up looking more like an ice hockey goalie. Maybe you have a blocker on that low hand. So, like I said,
Right.
you can punch stuff out. I don't know, but I think we need to innovate because right now, most of the rules are offensive based. When there's not a lot of goalie based rules, it's a very high scoring offensive game typically. So when are the goalies going to all of a sudden, boom, I need to do this to be effective?
Right. And I think too, like your point with the ice hockey goalie has evolved so much. And just looking at the history of ice hockey goalie and seeing how that could possibly reflect any type of evolution with lacrosse goalies into the future is pretty interesting to consider too.
Well, that's a great point. You made me think about, some of the styles that ice hockey goalies have gone through. The older stand up, and Dominic Hasek got the butterfly style in there, and I I don't think that's so much prevalent anymore. But what's the last big stylistic change for lacrosse goalies? Right, I think maybe over the last 5 to 6 years, the split save, maybe.
Yeah, I was gonna say any type of like falling for a save, in my opinion, is probably what's been the biggest thing to change. And that started first with men's and then started translating to the women's a little bit after that.
Well, and even single knee down stuff like
Yep.
that. There's still so much pushback on that from more traditional coaches
Yep.
that, oh, that's a boys game style, that's not the way we do it in our game.
Mhm.
But back to Charlotte and Kayla ripping shots with their new technology and their creative minds. If we think we're going to stand up straight and do those old rowboat kind of saves, whoa,
Right.
they're just not going to work anymore.
Yeah. I remember when I first started playing lacrosse goalie for low shots, I would always either bring one knee down or both knees down. And coaches would always tell me to change, to do the what you call the tripod save, where you're just like stepping to it, getting the stick low, getting your body over the ball, whatever. And I still did that, but I always found I was so much more effective at saving the ball when I dropped my knees towards it. And coaches still would always, until I was done with college, would say, step to it and save it, step to it and save it. And I'm just like, well, it's very clear that I am so much more successful falling on my knees than stepping to it and saving it. Um, but again, like it's just, what are you most effective at? Like some goalies are best at the tripod save. Some goalies are best at the split save, fall on your butt. Some goalies are best at falling on one knee. It's just what can you do and still make it be effective enough to make saves consistently.
Well, I love that point that you said some goalies are better at staying up for the tripod, some are better at going to the knees, some are going for split. To me, it gets back to, what would your natural motion,
Mhm.
if you didn't have a lacrosse stick in your hand and we're trying to save that shot, what would your natural motion do for you, right?
Right.
Because how
Yeah.
many how many times have you worked with goalies and you see them glitching,
Yeah.
because they're fighting what they think they should do
Mhm.
and what they think they should do because they have a stick in their hand.
Right.
So a lot of times, and this almost goes back to your what's the easy thing, question for me, is they're so like in their heads is that, oh, I should be doing it this way. Is I'll just be like, you know what? Your job's to keep the ball in the net.
Yep.
Just don't even think. And then
Yeah.
they slowly start to develop like what's natural for them. And like,
Right.
it might be stand up, it might be knee, it might be something we've never even seen yet before.
Right. Yeah, like the way you save needs to be unique to you. It can't be what your high school coach who never played goalie a day in his life is telling you. Like obviously it's good to listen to coaches and see what they're saying for maybe the structure of it, but to fight what's natural, I feel like creates such a disservice to yourself. Um, because I feel like what's natural is generally what's faster
Well, and
and
here's
more
another
effective.
here's another great example of that. So off stick, let's say off stick, just under your shoulder, right? So no stick, top hand up, throw me a baseball or a lacrosse ball, whatever, throw it to where I just talked about. I can guarantee you I'm going like that.
Right. You're right. Yes.
But as soon as we put a lacrosse stick in our hand,
Goalies are all, yeah. I know.
take hip
Yep.
even. Take there is no way I would
Yeah.
try to catch a ball thrown at me like that. But as soon as we get
Yeah.
that magical mind numbing device in our hand,
Yep.
we're like, oh, I'm supposed to do it like that.
Right. The corkscrew. That's what I call it.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a great example. And again, you're fighting what you naturally would do.
Yeah. Yep.
So, I tell you what, it adds some complexity and it creates a whole new set of problems when you go over
Yeah.
to get to your kneecap.
Right. 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 Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. And then you really look kind of weird
But it's
doing
a
it.
more natural movement.
Yeah. Yep. All right, next question. So, do you think the good goalies of like the 2010s, so I think like Liz Hogan, Brittany Dipper, Devin Wills, even though I think she was a little bit earlier than 2010, do you think they would still be take them how they played and implant them into today's game, college game? Do you think they would still be as good?
I obviously back to the same age they were.
Yeah, yes, that too. Yep.
I absolutely think they would.
Uh-huh.
And the reason I say that is, those are all high level athletes, high
Mhm.
level goalies you mentioned. And I they got, again, I don't know them, so I'm speculating here, but they got to where they were by finding what was most effective for them,
Mhm.
even if that was inside the constraints of how they were taught. I mean, they had the athleticism, they had the mindset to figure out how to do that.
Right.
And, like Devin, certainly a trailblazer in terms of, just her style of play and what she could face and
Yeah.
playing with the men and things. So I think they had, I said they had the athleticism and but more importantly, they had the ability, I believe, to think through those puzzles they were
Mhm.
faced and be effective at what they did. So I think they'd plop into this new environment, especially if let's say we expanded what us as coaches are letting them do. I think they would
Right.
thrive. They'd be like a catfish in a fish tank. They would just like grow to that environment and
Yeah.
they'd be out there kicking butt.
Yeah, that's a good point that you have to consider their athleticism and their IQ, and that they maximized their potential with what was around them at the time, and that they probably would do the same if they were playing now in the 2020s versus the 2010s.
Well, and I think they would love the challenge.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh my god, yeah. Well, especially like, I mean, Liz Hogan just retired a few years ago. Like she was still playing, obviously not the college game. Like she was playing the world circuit, which similar but different. But I still think like to be able to be that athletic, have that IQ, and then also have that durability as an athlete for so long is very impressive. Just because like most people they get to the end of high school and they're done, or most people they get to the end of college and they're done, and then continue to have that longevity is very very impressive and cool, and also like good for her too.
Yeah, Liz was a beast, great ambassador for the game.
Yep.
All the ones you mentioned certainly were.
Yep.
So even from a role model perspective, I
Yes.
think they would still be wearing that proudly and advancing the position.
Oh my god, yeah, yeah. She went to Victor too, I believe. I'm pretty
I
sure she
think
went
you're
to
right.
Victor. Yeah. Okay. Last question. In your opinion, who is the greatest women's lacrosse goalie of all time and why?
Oh wow. Can I say Bree Star?
Ha! I'm not sure the stats would be there to support it, but you could make that argument maybe.
Hey, I can like who I like. Wow. Wow, wow, wow.
And this also like this question too, like what in your opinion, like what are the characteristics of a greatest athlete of all time? Right? Like what feeds it? Is it longevity? Is it durability? Is it how you change the game? Is it IQ? Is it athleticism? Is it the awards and the accomplishments you had? Like what in your opinion is a GOAT athlete?
Oh well, okay, I'm gonna start with that one because it's so take out the award, take out
Yeah.
the external
Yep.
recognition piece of it. And I think everything you talked about is I think is important. I think like the longevity and the ability to play at that level is a testament to the commitment to being an athlete.
Mhm.
So, your nutrition, your rest to work ratio, or you're getting proper sleep. You're committed to doing whatever workouts, cardio stuff you're in. I think all that defines, I think there's a quote that says the definition of greatness, or the definition of a great athlete, is putting in the work when no one's watching, or doing what
Mhm.
others won't do. So I think if you have that mindset, I mean, even if you can't do that at the level that would make you a professional, I think that makes you an athlete,
Mhm.
which will make you be successful. I think the other set of that is the mindset to go along with it. That there's a lot of hard work and grueling days and painful days and days you don't want to do it anymore, maybe. But the perseverance through that, because you're playing the game you love, and you're still attached to that feeling of love to it, even though it's hard.
Mhm.
Hey, sometimes life's hard, sometimes it's not.
Right.
And I think the other component to that, a little bit, for female athletes, is the connection with the fan base, the connection
Mhm.
with the little girls who are looking at them, wanting to be them as well. It's just the women's games across all sports aren't as supported as well as the men.
Right.
So you hear a lot that, oh, well, I'm not a role model. I'm a professional, whatever,
Right.
athlete, musician. But I think on the female side, there also has to be an understanding that you actually are, in order to advance the game, just because
Mhm.
it needs all the help it can get at this point in time.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important aspect. Wow, greatest goalie. I don't really think I can answer this fairly, because I see this in two lights. I think if you were to talk about the greatest, more stay-at-home style goalie, I think maybe we're talking Megan Taylor.
Yeah, she was a name that flashed in my head.
And
Yep.
a lot of people throw she was the only goalie to win the Twort and the Word and stuff like that, but I really don't. That's validation for all the
Yeah.
hard work and all the other stuff she actually accomplished. So, you know, great goalie. Some of the saves she made, as a, again, stay at home, just absolutely unbelievable. Her hand speed is
Mhm.
crazy.
And
Um,
what's so interesting too, you look at Megan Taylor, and not to say that, like, you have to look a certain way to be, like, a lacrosse goalie. You would never know just by looking, because she's a bit shorter, like, she's smaller, right? She doesn't appear as strong. You wouldn't think that she would go out there and be as such a good goalie as she was, just simply because of her size. So I think the fact that she was already an undersized goalie and was able to do as well as she did, I think is pretty cool.
well, and I think I don't. Did you ever watch, when she was at Maryland? She did these videos with Caroline Steele. I don't know if you
Mhm.
ever saw those, where they were just kind of goofing around with each other. I forget what they were called. Like 3 minutes with,
I might have seen it, yeah.
right? It was something like that, and just her sense of humor and her
Mhm.
obvious love for her teammates and what she was doing. We talked about it a little earlier, but I think just having that love in her heart for where she was
Mhm.
at just helped propel her to do that kind of, make those kind of history book things.
That I think she had really good character and integrity, it seemed like. Obviously, I don't know her personally, but I've played with a lot of goalies, I've seen a lot of goalies, and not every goalie is as humble or down to earth as she was and still is. And I think one thing about her too, like, she like, you ask kids now who their favorite goalie is, and most of them will probably say, like, Taylor Moreno or Delaney Switzer. Like, she won the tour, and her name probably won't come up among younger kids. And I think that's just because she, like, while she was good, like, still stayed down to earth and didn't, I don't know, didn't let the fame consume her. And not that, like, Delaney Switzer and Taylor Marino are, like, I definitely think they're doing a very good job with it, but, like, she did a really good job of, like, knowing where her boundaries were of this is my lacrosse life, this is my personal life, this is my student life, and this is where and how I want to succeed. It seemed like she had her priorities very straight.
Yeah, I would agree. So it's so the less stay at home. It's funny you mentioned Schweitzer and Moreno. I was kind of thinking of those, but I think I'm going to go back to Liz Hogan
Yeah.
for the more active goalie, and just for the reason because she's still so newly out of the game that
Mm-hmm.
I think she's influencing the Morenos and the Schweitzers, and
Yep.
just her style of play and her activity and her athleticism, her aggressiveness. I I don't think she's done influencing the current bunch that's in there.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe she's tailing out of that process a little bit, but I think for now I'll go with Liz Hogan. Girl's a beast.
Yeah, there's, and like what I was saying, there's something to be said about her longevity and how she was able to play and play well for as long as she did. And then too, just the fact that she was in the era of lacrosse goalies where most people did the stereotypical traditional goalie and she didn't, which, she played under Gary and Gary was not stereotypical traditional either. So it helps that she had Gary as her head coach, who was probably encouraging her to play however was most effective for her. But to take the risks that she did when she didn't have any role models to look at who were doing it too, right? Social media wasn't huge then, so you weren't really seeing anything on TikTok or Instagram to see how other goalies were playing. Like she just kind of took her style of play and ran with it despite what other people thought or said or did or maybe even coached her. And she, I believe, was a Tewaaraton finalist. I think I could be wrong, but I think she was a Tewaaraton finalist her junior year. I could be wrong, but I think her junior year she was a Tewaaraton finalist.
I just loved what you said about that, tied back into the question about the athlete too, right? So obviously an amazing physical athlete. But it was that mindset and that kind of exploratory push. Let's push the boundaries a
Mhm.
little bit. Let's be creative. And I think I agree with you with Gary Gate and kind of that timing where he was kind of pushing the boundaries of the women's game a little bit as well. And I think that was probably a perfect match in time that really helped her, like you
Yeah.
said, develop into what she became.
Oh yeah, like you see all these goalies, and the biggest thing I tell goalies when they're being recruited, I'm like, make sure there's a goalie coach. Make sure there's a goalie coach who will support you and develop you. And you do wonder, like, what would have happened to Megan Taylor if she didn't go to Maryland? What would have happened to Liz Hogan if she didn't go to Syracuse? What would have happened to Taylor Moreno if she didn't play at UNC and have, I think it's Phil Barnes, I think his name is.
I believe that's
Um,
true.
yeah, if she didn't have him coaching him. So you question, like, all these goalies had these goalie coaches or lack of goalie coaches, um, and where would they have been if they didn't have them, or where would they have been if they did have the support and the coaching, right? Because there's still so many college teams, D1, D2, D3, that do not have any type of goalie, anybody on staff. Like even just like a random defensive coach who knows a little bit about goalie. Like there's still so many teams that don't have that. And I
I
just,
think it's crazy.
yeah, I think you as a head coach, like if you're a head coach of a team, I get it. Like funds are tough, whatever, but see if you could scrape up a volunteer somewhere to just do something with the goalie, because the poor goalies, like there you have your defense coach, you have your offensive coach, like you have your head coach, like all these positions have all these coaches, and now you're leaving the goalie to clear with another goalie as you're doing like OD divide talking stuff, right? Like that's such a disservice. You're not developing your goalie at the college level. Like
Right. I know. Hey, by the way, how'd you know they scraped me up from somewhere? And you also gave me another book idea. Like take one
yeah,
of these goalies and put them under a different coach and try to speculate
right.
what might have gone different, and then compare the two.
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yep. It's wild. And that's one thing too that makes me really sad about women's lacrosse and just women's sports in general. Right. You look at football teams and they have a coach for every position, 10 graduate assistants, like they have everything, like a coaching staff of 50. And some women's lacrosse teams have one head coach because that's all the athletic department can afford. And it's
Yeah.
just like, like it's right now, women's sports are growing, lacrosse is growing, and that's just, where it lands for some teams, unfortunately. And, some people just might not, and obviously development doesn't land all on the coach, right? Like athletes have to like put in the work themselves too, but there's something to be said about having a coach who will put in the time to give you feedback and tips and advice, and a coach who just, is spread too thin and can't do that for every single player.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Even if there's, if you buy into that, they're autonomous in their development and stuff, they still need someone guiding them down that path. So they know what to kind of explore
Right.
and to help them when they're floundering a little. So 100%, I think that kind of summarizes my coaching philosophy, that I'm more of a guide and a facilitator than a dictator.
Right. Yeah. And I think too, just coaches offer another perspective, right? Like, your perspective of gameplay, of being in the game, in the crease. The coach knows the perspective of seeing what's going on when you're on the sideline, right? Or when they're on the sideline. So I think, I don't know, there's all these perspectives and stuff that not every goalie gets, unfortunately, because of whatever system they are in for either high school or club, or whatever system they're in for college, you know?
Well, that's another good point on game day. And it's, it's easy to stand on the sideline as a goalie coach even and just be like, you should have done this.
Mhm.
But the thing is, we're looking at it from maybe midfield or 30-yard line-ish
Yeah.
out,
Yep.
right? And it's more like, I like to be like, well, what did you see
Mhm.
to have you make that decision? Because I feel it's important that they may have misread the situation, but made the correct response to that
Mhm.
misread. So that's a different issue than they just read it properly and did the wrong thing, the
Right.
wrong thing, whatever that is.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So it's like, it's important to get their perspective back to their kind of, what you see during that. Why'd you choose that?
Right. Right.
So
Yep.
we know as facilitators where to help them.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's a good way to put it too, like facilitator. Um, because I think a lot of what you were saying earlier, a lot of players will look to you as a dictator, which, in some cases might work. But I think facilitator is better because you're trying to facilitate the skills that they have to like capitalize them and grow and be the best player they can be. I like facilitator. That's a good word.
I come up with sometimes something good.
Yeah. All right. That was my last question.
Well, that wasn't,
And,
you took it easy on me. That wasn't too bad.
oh, okay.
You had some tough ones. So
Yeah.
this is
I Yeah, you had some really good answers. You really did.
it's all in the facilitation of the questions.
Yes, exactly, because coaches are facilitators.
Bree, thanks for having me tonight.
Yes, of course. Thank you for being on the 6 in the 6 podcast, your own podcast.
I know it'll probably be the least watched version yet, but we'll see.
Negative 5 views.
-5, hold it. If they were -5, would that be thumbs up would be negatives, or
Yeah, I don't know.
that's no too much math for me.
Yeah, me too.
Bree, thanks for having me. We will definitely be talking soon.
Of course. Yep. Thanks for having me.
Oh
Bye.
yeah, later.